From the late 1860s into the 1930s, the American West expanded rapidly, and the railroads were largely responsible for bringing people and goods into this region of the country. Thousands of miles of railroad were built, and for each mile constructed, more than 2,600 railroad ties were required. In order to build these many miles of railroads and to maintain existing track, hundreds of millions of trees were cut down from the forests of the West. These trees were then hewn by hand into railroad ties by a breed of men known as tie hacks. A group of volunteers joined National Forest Service archaeologists to explore the history of tie hacking in the Roosevelt National Forest. The Passport in Time program, or PIT, is administered by the U.S. Forest Service.
All right, what level are we at here?
We're in level 2, 10 centimeters going to...
PIT projects bring together volunteers along with National Forest Service archaeologists and historians to explore the cultural heritage of our public lands.
Do we see any variation in the kind of artifacts as we go down? So we'll just do a 50 by 50 centimeter square.
In the summer of 2006, this PIT project was begun, examining the history of the town site known as Old Roach, a 1930s-era tie hacking community.
We'll go down another 10 centimeters. So this week we've been working on the Exploring the Old Roach Passport in Time project. So we have been recording the Old Roach town site, which was actually the headquarters of the Auto Lumber Company. We believe it was occupied basically between 1922 and 1938, and those are just the years that we know right now. We don't have really good records for it. And it was a town that was actually, it was a logging camp, but it was actually kind of a real town. It had its own post office and a one-room schoolhouse. And we don't know exactly how many people lived there, but probably people have said a number of families and also a number of bachelors that would have lived on their own there. And it's just a really large archaeological site now. They were required to remove the buildings when their timber contract was over with. This is on Forest Service land. And so it's just a big archaeological site, and the beauty of having a Passport in Time project here is that we can get a lot of volunteers here to help us record the site because it's just enormous.
The Old Roach town site is located in the northwestern corner of the Roosevelt National Forest, near the Wyoming border. To reach this remote work site, each day the PIT crew had to travel over many miles of rough Forest Service roads. Once the crew arrived at the work site, they unloaded their equipment and began locating archaeological sites. Each new site once found is given a number, and then very carefully described. Also, the coordinates of each site are located using GPS technology. This will allow for a future map to be drawn of the Old Roach town site. Photographs of Old Roach and similar logging camps give us a glimpse of what Old Roach may have looked like at one time. Much of what is known about Old Roach and nearby logging camps comes from this book, written by Patricia Langendorf, who grew up in these camps in the 1930s. In fact, a highlight of this PIT project was the opportunity to meet with Miss Langendorf, seen here in the lower right, to hear her personal stories of growing up in these camps. She was accompanied by her niece and nephew, who also shared their family stories, as well as many of the photographs shown in this video. These oral histories were also video recorded for future reference. Back at the project location, the archaeological survey extended well beyond the town of Old Roach itself. A little more than a mile from town lies a small but important feature known as Stuck Creek.
And also doing a little bit of survey down Stuck Creek, which is one of the drainages that was logged and was used to drive ties down to Laramie. And we found a number of sites along Stuck Creek, as well as some isolated slab piles and things like that that are just in the general area.
Only the centers of the tree trunks were used to produce railroad ties, and large piles of waste lumber, or slabs, remain to this day.
This is the Stuck Creek Dam. This is a splash dam. What this was used for is when they were logging ties, they would cut all of the ties in the winter when the creek was low, and they built this dam so that as the creek started rising, it would fill up this little area that we're in now with water and make a giant pond, and they would put all of the ties on the other side of the dam, the downstream end of the dam. They would stack them all in that area behind the dam, and when they were ready to drive them all down to Laramie, they would open up this sluice right here, and all of the water that was gathered up behind here would come surging through there and would push maybe 50,000 to 250,000 ties, they say, all the way down Stuck Creek to Laramie. And it would take several days of the tie hacks following all of these ties going down the creek, and they would have to poke them loose when they got hung up on the side of the creek, and that's how they got the ties all the way down to where the railroad was.
This wooden splash dam is over 70 years old and is remarkably well preserved. It is, however, showing some signs of aging, and the Forest Service has done some preliminary work to stabilize this piece of tie hacking history. About a quarter-mile further down Stuck Creek lies another piece of preserved history, this wooden flume. While the flume's state of decay is more advanced than that of the dam, many of its architectural details are still evident. The history of this flume and how it was used are a bit unclear and are still being investigated by the archaeological team. These are the only two known photographs of this flume while it was being used in the spring tie drive operations. By carefully analyzing these photos and comparing them with the archaeological evidence found on the ground, we may be better able to understand how this flume was used.
Oh yeah.
Back at Old Roach, discoveries continued to be made.
Go ahead.
I thought you were going to say something. I heard it go beep beep.
We found another well when you're done over there.
Old Roach was not merely a logging camp, but a functioning town, where men, women, and children all lived and worked and played together. A wonderful collection of photos shows the playful spirit of the tie hacks and their families. We know this from the oral histories that were collected, but also the archaeological evidence also suggests that there is families living in Old Roach.